we can think of this story 170 years of media development, the development of three ages: reportage, live transmission, and effects. So James Brady's Civil War photography was celebrated for being unvarnished, unprecedented in terms of its testimony of the brutality of war. Many of them show landscapes littered with bodies, the aftermath of battles during the Civil War. So the camera captured truthfully what was before it. It was an unimpeachable testimony of things as they were. But it's now been discovered that many of those photographs were, if not staged, they were choreographed. So bodies often were put in places, given romantic elements. And, it happens also in the inception of early film, early moving film, with the paradigmatic duality of two French filmmakers, early French filmmaking studios. One, the Lumière brothers, showing images of trains coming right at the camera that, famously would be shown in Paris, and people would flee the cinema. So everyday life, unfiltered. But at the same time, there was a filmmaker named Georges Méliès who makes a very fanciful account of a rocket trip to the moon, in which the rocket sort of sticks into the moon's face, and the man in the moon has a kind of black eye as a result of the rocket hitting him in the face. So it's crazy, surreal film. And in theoretical terms, at the very same time, at the end of the 19th century, the turn of the century, Saussure begins to theorize the idea of a gap between the word and the true. So he talks about language being constituted as the signifier and the signified. World War II was the first war, in a sense, that began to transpire with media representation fully involved in telling the story of what was going on, to tell a propaganda story. Nazi examples and American examples. So Joseph Goebbels, Nazi propaganda, the films of Leni Riefenstahl in terms of extolling the Nazi ethos. And in the U.S., something like Frank Capra's Why We Fight. The protection of state interests begin to be fully integrated into certain kinds of media practices. Representations of the blast at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were part of the plan. It wasn't just the bombs. We had to have the images of what took place to promulgate and proffer the succeeding threat, the threat that would hang as a kind of a deterrent thereafter. In the 70s, especially during the period with the end of the Vietnam War, which was the first war to be called the Living Room War, because it came into living rooms through television news. This still had a significant lag time on it. So there was often as much as a 2 to 3 week lag between something happening in the war and when it was transmitted. So there was still this incredible kind of time shift in terms of what was taking place. But in the 70s, there began to be more portable recording devices. It was a shift in news culture that began with independent filmmakers. So it's an important other aspect now coming on is to consider the role of people who are not part of large corporations, who are not part of major media companies. Watergate began to use, in an unprecedented way, live transmission. So when the presidency begins to disintegrate, it happened on live television in a way that was a seismic event to live through. So live transmission directly impacted the conduct of the Republic. That really kind of brings us right into the 90s, and it gets us to what I describe as the age of effects, our age. Things that are much more familiar to you as viewers of television, news, and documentary over the last 20 years. The first one was really the Gulf War, the first Gulf War in the early 90s, where a lot of that war was caught for the first time live. That was called, at the time, it was called the CNN effect. And if you see that referred to, this is what it refers to as these early technologies that began to capture live real-time images of war, things that had never before been seen in American television. The next one is the network effect, in a sense. The rise of the internet, a kind of citizen diplomacy, circumventing the apparatus of state power. The next one that I would point you to is the Al Jazeera effect. So the Al Jazeera effect really comes on with the beginning of Gulf War II. So what it begins to point to is a world, a globalized media environment where multiple centers of ideological content are being globally transmitted. So the Al Jazeera effect is the multiplication of news sources outside of the American and Western state models. So 2003, the networked Nokia effect. The Nokia effect is the dispersion of media production capacity into all of our little personal digital devices. The last one, the social network effect. So a way of thinking about these little effects are these moments that kind of crystallize them. Yesterday, for the first time ever, the Polk Award was given to an anonymous awardee for the image of Nida Agha Sultan, the Persian woman who was killed during one of the Green Uprising manifestations in the aftermath of the Iranian election last summer. We don't know who took it or who uploaded it, but we do know it has news value. This award celebrates the fact that in today's world, a brave bystander with a cell phone camera can use video sharing and social networking sites to deliver news. So in this short period of time, we have gone through this extraordinary phase shift in terms of our relationship to media. And we are, in a sense, still way out ahead of our understanding of how they affect us. We are in the midst of this story, and we are nowhere near thinking about a kind of endpoint for these vectors of technology, truth-telling, ideological formation, resistance. Whose story will be told, and how does the tale unfold? What are the forces at play? How do you constitute yourself as a storyteller in the public sphere? That's the question.